What's up, everyone? This is Josh Vigran, and you're listening to Between Movements. Hello and welcome to another episode of Between Movements. Today I'll be talking with Tony Park. Some might say that Tony is an identity-confused, busy freelancing musician in New York City. As a clarinetist, saxophonist, conductor, arranger, educator, and a repair technician, he is hell-bent on figuring out the meaning of being a professional musician in today's industry. Whether it's teaching his adult students at Queens College, or fixing a flute used and abused by a middle schooler, or premiering a nearly impossible solo bass clarinet piece, Tony questions everything he does with near skeptic caution and strives to deliver the goods on all fronts. During the program, I'll be playing a couple of pieces which Tony features in as a performer. I know Tony from my time at Queens College, and I'm happy to have him on Between Movements today. Right, so ethnic identity and classical music, it's an interesting one. Well, you're Korean. Were you born in Korea or were you born in Canada?
I was actually born in upstate New York, Buffalo, New York, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but then when I was 2 months old, my family relocated to Korea, where I grew up until I was 13, and then I moved to Canada. So actually, in high school, I wrote an essay. I think we were learning about the national identity or something.
Right.
And we were supposed to talk about our national identity. And I flat out wrote that I felt very confused because I didn't know what mine was. You know?
Right.
Because obviously at that point, you know, I had already kind of spent my formative years in Canada, away from Korean society. But obviously I just look like a Korean person without all the, I guess, the true Korean mannerisms. And especially here, it's interesting being here.
Here, you mean in New York?
Yeah, sorry, being in New York. As soon as I was kind of assimilated into certain Korean gig circuit, I was suddenly Korean, like more Korean than I've ever been. So... You know, it doesn't really matter how I feel. Like, it's kind of more what they see that I am. So, I mean, it kind of worked in my favor in certain ways, especially financially. I got literally 99.9% of my teaching is teaching Korean students. Yeah, it wasn't always like that, but it just, at some point, it just kind of turned that way.
Right.
Yeah, and I do get quite a bit of Korean gigs, but yeah, I feel kind of funny about that because...
Do you feel like you were kind of pulled into that?
Yeah, at some point, definitely. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I was a big part of that, for sure. But I'm not the only one. I mean, there are other people who are exactly in the same boat as me. So
that affected, like, the kind of music you're playing as well? Like, are you expected to play Korean music?
I mean, for certain events, they, you know, of course, they play Aryang and stuff like that, but I don't know how to say this otherwise, but they're kind of using their Korean identity as a leverage to hold events so that they can perform and whatnot, so... Right. Yeah, that's why, like, they need me, you know, and other people like me, so...
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me because, well, I'm mixed race.
Yeah.
Being half Filipino, half Jewish. And the Jewish side, well, my dad, his parents were sort of agnostic. Although all his cousins had bar mitzvahs, he never had a bar mitzvah. He never went to Hebrew school, and of course I didn't. So yeah, I feel like I didn't really fit into that category. Yeah. And then the Filipino side, you know, my mom left and she's in America, and I sort of grew up most of the time away from her family. Yeah. When I was about, I think, 11, moved away and never really had any connection to that as well. So it's an interesting thing.
Right.
But you have American citizenship?
Yeah, I have American and Canadian. I used to have American and Korean, but I needed to give it up in order to not be enlisted in the army, Korean army, at a certain age. So, yeah, American, Canadian, and also somehow Korean. I mean, I look completely Korean. The reason why I mentioned being an Asian musician in why classical music, it's just a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately. Not just in the classical community, but in the world. They talk about your identity in so many ways, and they talk about topics like cultural appropriation. And I was just wondering at some point, like, what music can I play, and like, is it okay for me to play, and what music can I convincingly play, or am I overthinking it? But I'll give you an example. So, as you know, I've been subbing on the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof, the off-Broadway production. And the show is completely in Yiddish. Every song, every dialogue, everything, every line is in Yiddish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'm a clarinetist, and there's on-stage part for me as well as in the pit. So I have to be on stage, I have to move around, memorize choreography and playing. And I have to play like the wedding scene, right? So I have to play like a klezmer musician. I'm a klezmorin, as they say in Yiddish. And I thought a lot about this, And first of all, I was so in awe that they would ask me to, sub the main guy. My friend Cecil, he's the clarinetist and the former contractor for that production. And I was like, wow, these people are so cool about this. And I just wanted to serve the music, serve the production. And I guess they liked me enough to keep me around. But I'll tell you a funny story. The first time my wife came to see the show, she told me when I walked on the stage, there were these older ladies around her that confusingly, rushed back to their program. And they kind of looked down, looked up, looked down, looked up. And they're like, they're looking at me. They're like, Dimitri Zisel Slapovich? And they were so, they were so confused because they didn't include my name as a sub. I mean, that's not a normal thing that they do.
Yeah, that's like the most Jewish name ever.
yeah, right. So obviously, people are not colorblind, but in a way they are in hiring me. And so I think that's a very kind of a New York thing. I don't know if that would be like that in other places as much, but I guess nowadays, I mean, I see like Korean people singing Italian operas in like Italian opera houses. So I don't know.
It's an issue that's been around. I think it's not a new issue,
right?
Because when the Jews were in Europe, there was that whole racial clash too, because they were playing music that really wasn't theirs. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at any classical orchestra now, I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that there's a predominance of Asians in the field at this moment. Yeah. And it's funny because I think it was Itzhak Perlman who I was listening to an interview with. There's a sort of a stereotype that Asians play mechanically. And I think it's partially due to the education system. In places like China, Korea, and Japan, it tends to be highly, highly technical, perhaps overly technical. Yeah. What's interesting is that those same complaints were made of Jewish musicians in Europe historically. And over time, it became sort of the opposite, where the Jews began to dominate. And Horowitz, Heifetz, all these great names, Itzhak Perlman, they're known to be the greats. So I think times change, and it's something that I talked about in class, actually. We had talks about cultural appropriation. I don't know where to draw the line. I played in a Jamaican African-American church. I played their reggaes and their calypsos. I don't look like them.
Yeah. So I thought about this a lot, and so there's this composer named Seung Yeun, or Yoon Sang. He was a Korean composer that was, I believe, predominantly educated in Japan, and then he went to Germany and Paris to study. So his music, was kind of the days of post-surrealism, and so the way I see it, I don't think he was all that interested in Korean traditional music. Right. Until I guess he kind of had to market it for himself globally. So he obviously he didn't really study traditional Korean music, but he does adapt these idiomatic techniques in various instruments to evoke the sounds of Korean folk instruments and Korean style of singing, using sharp articulations followed by like wide vibrato and all these things. And yeah, you should look him up because his life is very interesting, because he was kidnapped by the South Korean Secret Service, and then he's from South Korea and then was abducted to South Korea. Yeah, while he was in Germany, he actually spent the rest of his life in North Korea, kind of serving the North Korean like propaganda and stuff like that. So,
how do you spell his name?
Seung Yeun. So Isang Yun. Yeah, his music is really great. I admire him a lot. So I was wondering like how he would have felt, especially back then,
Right.
I mean, it seemed like he was very revered by his contemporaries, like European contemporaries. So he must have been super legit, and I mean, most of them didn't seem to have problem with him composing in their Western classical music idiom.
Well, from a Korean composer who uses the Western classical idiom to a performer who uses it, let's hear one of Tony's tracks. This is the prelude from the Bach Cello Suite number 1. It will be played on bass clarinet by Tony Park.
Anyway, so I was thinking, if I were more Korean than I am, and if someone played quote-unquote Korean style music, like how would I feel? Like someone that's not Korean, right? Because I don't really understand cultural appropriation, because I feel like I don't really have a strong cultural identity. You know what I mean?
Yes, I relate to you, but
yeah,
I think personally people are way too easily offended about these things, at least in our country. From my experience, when I was at the Jamaican church, they loved it. They loved that I learned those rhythms. Some of them told me man, when I close my eyes and listen to you, I couldn't tell if you were not Jamaican.
Right.
To me, that's a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely.
They didn't take it as wrong. I mean, if you're trying to make fun of it, that's another thing. If you're taking inspiration from it, that's another. Like, you could take something as simple as cooking or food. Like, when I cook, I try to make different dishes from different places because I like it. I like the variety. Same with music. I like listening to music from a variety of places. So, personally, I don't like being told that I can't play something or do something because I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the conclusion that I've been kind of, circling around, that if you play the style of music, whatever style of music, with the best intentions and only after extensive research and training, I think it's okay. If people like it, that's fine.
But there's always going to be people
who
don't like it.
That's right.
You're always going to make somebody mad.
But that's like with anything. I mean, you can't please everybody, right?
You're right.
But that's not just other cultures. Even within same culture, people will be offended,
Oh, yeah.
Debussy offended these French people, and Stravinsky offended these people, So it's bound to happen no matter what you do. There's going to be people who don't like what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all we can do is play with the best intentions.
Right, the best intentions. And I mean, life is so diverse. There are so many cultures. It's so beautiful to me finding out about new cultures. That's so cool.
Right, yeah. And right now, we have more resources than ever, so we have no excuse to not do our best in researching if we want to pursue,
There's a piece by Debussy. He was influenced in the Paris World Fair when he heard Indonesian gamelan for the first time.
Right.
And he wrote this piece, Pagode. It's based on gamelan, but if you hear gamelan, it really doesn't sound like that. He used the pentatonic scale.
Right. Yeah.
It sounds nothing like it, yet I think it's a beautiful piece of music, and I play it.
Yeah.
So am I not going to play it because it's not correctly appropriating the culture? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
It can get so confusing.
Yeah.
So, do you miss certain aspects of being a musician in Canada or Korea as opposed to New York City?
Well, I actually immigrated to Canada before I could be like a professional musician. I actually became a professional musician like here.
In New York?
Yeah, mostly. I had like little gigs here and there in Canada, and then I went back to Canada for a year, and then I did some gigs. I miss my family, extended family in Korea, and I miss my immediate family in Canada. But I did find that Canadian music scenes are more hierarchical. So I'm not trying to be cynical. By the way, I think often people mistake me for a cynical person, but I'm just, I think I'm just a realist. Anyway, so I was going to say, I think basically in Canadian music scenes, you're kind of a nobody unless you're a veteran in the scene, through like university circuit or something, or you play in the symphony. Yeah, so in that regard, I don't really miss being a professional. Oh, of course, I'm talking strictly about classical music. But here, yeah, I find, again, like culturally and musically, I feel more fulfilled and more like a part of a more egalitarian musical society. So
I lived in New York for just over 5 years working as a musician.
Yeah.
I always joked with people saying that to me, living in New York City was like being in an abusive relationship because one day you just love it. You love everything about it. You love the food and the culture and everything there is. And then the next day you're stuck in gridlock traffic and you spend an hour trying to find parking and, the subway breaks down and the air conditioning isn't working. What to you are some of the best and worst parts of living in New York City?
Oh, man. I think it's an emotional question, but, well, like you said, you can find such good food from all around the world at reasonable prices if you go to the right places. But musically speaking, you're surrounded by so many good musicians from all kinds of walks of life, not just orchestral, not just this, but people who have kind of walked all of them. So I like that a lot, because for me, I never really felt that my musical goals or my musical desires or like outlook was never really typical, I guess. I just had too many interests, and I thought maybe I should kind of squash them to be more serious musician. But here, if you just look around, there's so many people just like me and have actually done all those things and more. So I really love that. I mean, I'm sure there are people like that other places too. It's just that they're more here.
You're talking about sort of diversification of...
Yeah, diversification in different jobs in music, but also styles, not just classical. Because most clarinet players I know, they just play clarinet, like classical clarinet.
It's funny. I literally was just talking about this with my friend who I did the last podcast with, and we were saying it's sort of seems to be more and more important, actually, to be able to diversify as a musician today. Because, the industry has changed. Mm-hmm. If you can't do multiple things, it's kind of hard to get work. At least I've noticed that.
Yeah, at least if you want to be known or if you want to stay relevant, I'm just going to give an example. Like my teacher, Charles Neidig, when I was growing up, I thought he was just a soloist, just teaches at Juilliard. No, he teaches at like 5 different schools.
Right.
And he's touring constantly, not just performing, but coupled with master classes, endorsement for this and that. And
he's a great conductor too.
Yeah, he's a great conductor, also a great composer, a great editor of music. It's not always what it seems, So if you really dig deep enough. So I think it's just natural, there are certain steps that you have to take to make certain things happen for yourself. And there's no shame in that. I feel like for so long, people, especially in the classical realm, they're like practice and audition and do competitions and you'll be, that's how you make a career. But if you want that career, sure. But but nowadays,
but that's not even guaranteed. What are you gonna do as a backup? How are you gonna manage it?
Yeah, right. Honestly, nowadays you're gonna burn out. I think if you just do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, but there's really no pay in that. So you should find out their revenues.
Yeah, there's almost no pay, and the work required to do it. Oh, it's so hard. The amount of work you put in and the pay that you get out of it.
And also, there's not even that much demand anymore,
Sadly, no.
And it's just, it's a shift in interest, and it might come back, it might not. But I think through YouTube and through different platforms of exposure, you have so many resources at your fingertips. So
yeah.
And so many people who are not, at the liberty of accessing all these things, just Google it or like YouTube it, and then it'll come up. And whatever you can possibly think of, you can listen to.
Yeah.
And if you don't know something, I remember being in high school, I was just discovering rock music. I was so sheltered, because my parents said rock music is, devil's music. So I didn't listen to it for a long time. And when I kind of said to myself, I think I need to discover this for myself. Right. So I kind of, secretly discovered classic rock music. But I also went through a lot of bad music to get through, to get to what I really like listening to. So if you go to my room right now in my parents' place, you'll see CDs from Christian rock, Avril Lavigne, Backstreet Boys, Queensryche, Megadeth, Miles Davis, Yo-Yo Ma, just the most random,
Yeah, same here.
This was actually like right before YouTube. So I was kind of studying Wikipedia, actually, and actual encyclopedias. I don't know if people read those anymore, but...
I don't know why, but you're not the only one who said this. And I remember feeling this way, like I should sort of squash that and just focus in. Maybe it's something in the way our institutions teach us that make it seem like we need to focus in on just one thing.
Yeah.
Where I remember a friend telling me, which made a lot of sense...
Yeah.
If you look at someone like Leonard Bernstein, one of the greatest conductors, he was interested in all kinds of Latin music, and he incorporated that. Yeah. He was interested in Indian ragas, and He's most well known for being a classical conductor, but he also did, his Broadway stuff and composed.
Oh yeah, I think, in my humble opinion, I think he was a better composer than a conductor. but also I think he was a fabulous educator.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any denying in that. He's just a brilliant man. He was a great conductor too, but his music is actually, I think, highly underrated. I mean,
West Side Story is great. I mean, if you analyze that.
Right, yeah, exactly. Even though those songs are super famous, if you get a chance to play those songs, it's really remarkable. The style is his own. Mm-hmm. Of course, he borrows from Latin music, American music, whatnot, but he does it so well,
Yeah, back to the whole cultural appropriation thing. I mean, he did it very tastefully. Why do you think there's that view or that narrative that we need to stick to one thing? Where does that come from?
I think partially because teachers want the best for their students, and so they just kind of want them to focus on one thing so that they have the advantage of focusing a lot of time on one thing so that they might get ahead of other people who might be less focused. I think it's kind of a more old school thinking, but I remember when I came to Queens College, Michael Mossman, the then jazz department director and also big band director, he knew right away that I was interested in jazz music, and I actually auditioned and joined a big band there. I think he thought I was a little bit odd because probably I was the only clarinetist in many years, if ever, that approached him. A classical clarinetist studying with Charles Neidig, showing up and, hey, I want to learn jazz. So he really helped me out. But he told me it's a traditional New York thing because he went to Oberlin for anthropology, just like Charles Neidig went to Yale for anthropology. They didn't get any music degrees.
Oh, wow.
And Yo-Yo Ma doesn't have a music degree, Hannah Chang doesn't have a music degree.
Wow.
These people, yeah.
I actually didn't know any of that.
Yeah, but they have many interests, and music was one of them. And
it's almost the opposite. It's like the more you expand your horizons, the more your music can grow and flourish.
Right. So in that way, their interests were pure,
So in a way, it's almost backwards. Like, I get what you're saying about it being sort of an old school mentality, but it's really not, because if you look at some old school guys like Oscar Peterson, one of the great jazz pianists, he studied his Chopin etudes and he was classically trained. A lot of great jazz musicians started out classical, but yet I've experienced the same thing you have in fact, all the schools I've been to, trying to break into the jazz realm as well.
Yeah.
I was sort of given these weird glances like, what are you doing? You're a classical pianist.
Yeah.
It made me feel weird.
Yeah, but before this podcast, I was thinking about these questions, and I realized basically, in the end, you kind of have to do your own duty of seeking out and surrounding yourself with the right people. There are going to be people who don't agree with you, and that doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just how they see the world, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to become something, especially in the field of music where there are no right answers, you have to just have to keep surrounding yourself with the right people. Right.
I guess the counter argument to this would probably be information overload.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a real thing for sure. If you're interested in so many things and you spread yourself too thin, you might not really be good at anything.
Yeah.
But the way I approach that with my own students is I make sure that their fundamentals are very, very strong. Mm-hmm. Their technique, their approach to music, their ears, how they listen. I think if you have really strong fundamental understanding, you can branch it out into many areas.
I think that's true. I've heard, because I'm actually trying to branch out in Dublin, tender age of 30. But anyway... I've heard that it's good to have strong foundation in one instrument before you branch out into other instruments. And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I've seen it. And I've seen the other case too, where they just kind of learn a lot of instruments at the same time. But either way, if you work hard, even if you start all instruments at the same time, if you work on your fundamentals, like you said, you're going to be solid.
Right.
You know, and your teaching methods are going to be solid, you know, because you know your fundamentals.
So now that you are 30 and I am almost 30 and kind of looking back at everything,
yeah,
is there anything that you would do different, that you would change?
So coming out of high school, right before graduating high school and going into university, again, going back, you know, about like squashing my many interests for, you know, one thing, especially to get into university, because you have to kind of choose an instrument, choose a major and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of actually torn between applying for jazz bass and classical clarinet. And at that point, yeah, because in high school I actually barely played any clarinet.
Oh.
In middle school, I played a lot of clarinet, but then I was actually playing more bass, upright bass, electric bass, and electric guitar, whatever.
Yeah. I played more electric guitar in high school as well, and middle school.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but I actually played guitar basically as long as I have played clarinet.
Huh.
Up to that point, and then I I moved away and I didn't have my guitars. But so I regret not pursuing both, because my passion for both styles, I think I was actually much more passionate about jazz music. But I think that would have been enough for me to focus on both. And they're actually different enough, like jazz bass and classical clarinet, that I could have strong fundamentals on both. Whereas it might be a little bit different story if I were trying to focus on jazz saxophone and classical clarinet at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the embouchure is just different enough that it'll kind of be more difficult to divide the two.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I would have liked to listen to my instincts more and seriously studied jazz and clarinet, because, I mean, even now I'm taking jazz saxophone lessons. I'm learning flute. I'm trying to teach myself bassoon. It's really hard, but when I'm doing these things, so many people have told me, you know, oh, if you learn saxophone, you say bye to your beautiful classical embouchure and your sound. But actually, they have no idea what they're talking about, because you learn so many things, maybe the same things, but in different ways, and you apply them in different contexts, and then you learn, oh, I can use this much air here too. You know, you learn different ways of using your embouchure, and oh, actually my embouchure can do more than just this, and I can use that in classical playing too. So I've learned so much trying to double, and also playing different styles, you know, fiddler in big bands, and playing a Korean pop saxophone band. So as Nidek said, do everything. You know, like really, if you follow your instinct with the best intentions and you just follow your interests and work hard,
yes,
I think everything's just connect at some point, and it's just gonna benefit each other. I mean, of course, sometimes it's hard. Yeah, like it takes me a little while to get back into my jazz saxophone embouchure if I haven't practiced in a week or a few days. Or going from clarinet to flute is really hard, but you know, that's something that you work on.
It's interesting. I was told the same kind of things, because I took organ lessons actually starting last year through this year. Yeah. And even now people were telling me, oh, you got to be careful because it's going to mess with your piano technique.
Watch out.
Yeah. I thought, what?
Yeah, watch out. You might make money.
No, just the opposite. It changed the way that I look at piano music, and it added to it, because you don't have your sustain pedal, so you got to hold your fingers a little differently. And I was like, oh, that would work really well for this piece. Yeah. Quite the opposite, like you said. And it's cool because you are one of the classical musicians who branched out. So when people find that out and they see you do other things, it's kind of a nice surprise. They're like, oh, you can do that too? I didn't know you could do that too. Right. I find that in my case, because there's sort of a stereotype that classical musicians can only do one thing. Right. It's a stereotype that's kind of based on a little bit of sad truth, but there are a surprising number of people, I'm realizing more and more, that do branch out. but they're almost like ashamed of it, or they kind of keep it hidden, like, well, I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're doing something wrong.
Like we talked about before, I don't know exactly why that is, but I mean, I think it comes down to what you are interested in. I mean, if you're really only interested in studying, music before a certain era or music after a certain era, that's fine.
Yeah, if you like that.
Yeah, but don't limit yourself, because this is what I found. I mean, I'm only 30, and I say that carefully because, I would like to think I'm only 30, not already 30. But
30 is the new 20, man.
Yeah, but basically, and I've talked to much older people that I respect a lot about this, and they all agree that you never feel accomplished. Your goals, you achieve your goals along the way. There's no goal that you achieve at the end. Maybe death. But if that's your goal, because your goals change, you achieve them along the way, and your priorities change. And I'm not saying that you should settle down and do this. It's just natural. Like, once you have achieved this goal, you get new goals. I mean, if you don't, I feel like something's wrong with your, learning methods.
It's cliche, but it is the journey.
Yeah.
The stuff you find along the way.
Yeah, because when you walk into a museum, I recently went to a museum in Montreal, and I realized I really like this guy's painting. But if I just look at all his painting and then I say, okay, I'm done with paintings now, no, I get interested in other paintings and other arts. That's the beauty of it. You learn more about other things and you learn about this. So I think that's one thing I love about being in music, is that there's never a shortage of things to learn. You're always learning. And also with teaching, you're always learning. Also with the repair, I do instrument repair. Always learning. There's always different ways to do the same thing and slightly different results. So it's really trial and error and your preferences. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. So if you're listening to this and you feel like you have too many interests, like I do, I mean, if you get lost your whole life, that's also not good. But explore as ferociously as you can, and then I think things will kind of clear up a little bit. At least for me, I have to get in there and mess everything up, and then just kind of. That's how I see clarity. Anyway, I can't just know from the beginning this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. That's not. Yeah. That's not been me. Some people maybe, not me.
I think you said that better than I could have said that. So now let's wrap up the program by hearing some of the music that comes from these multiple influences. This is a track by the artist Gadadu featuring Tony Park on clarinet. It's spelled Gadadu. You can find them on gadadu.com or on their YouTube page, Gadadu Music. This track is called Makeshift Constellations.
You